Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm John Geib. I'm with the Master Gardeners. I've been a Master Gardener for about 9 years. I have quite a bit of experience doing a lot of different things, and part of that has been landscape design. I can at least hit the good overview topics. When you start getting into plant specifics, I'm not quite as good on suggesting plants. But I do have some recommendations on where you can go to find some good information on that. Okay. Well, when we're talking about landscape design, it's a piece of property, which means location, location, location. Okay? Talk a little bit about the general concepts that we're going to need to make sure the yard looks at least halfway decent. Then we'll talk a little bit about native and adaptive plants and what that means and what we're going to try and suggest for various things. And then talk about maintenance. Now, the maintenance itself won't be a separate topic. It'll kind of get intermixed throughout the presentation on, why we're doing something is to keep the maintenance ideas low and best things. As you know, some of you all know, or are learning, as a couple of you all, we do live in a semi-desert. We get about 24 inches of rainfall on a good year. Of course, we have years like last year where we got about 12. But then there's also years we'll get 40. So you kind of have to deal with what we got. So the other problem that we have not only is lack of rainfall, but when and how we get it. Most of the rain we do get is during the summer, which isn't a bad thing for us. But when we do get it, it's a lot of times in the space of 3 inches overnight, which can be an issue. And then we won't get any rain for a month or 2 or 6. So this is one of the big problems that we're going to have to deal with when we're talking about landscape design, and putting in plants that can handle this type of weather. Next thing we need to worry about, a lot of times, you've got 2 types of plants that we're working with, either annuals, which we have to plant every year, or perennials, which will come back every year. Okay? Well, if we want them to come back, the first thing we have to do is have them survive the winter. Okay? So that survival through the winter depends on how hardy it is, depends on what zone that plant can survive in. USDA has gone through and made up a chart of the average low temperature that it expects to see during any given winter. About 5-6 years ago, USDA updated their maps because they go on based off of about a 20-year rolling average, and they bumped us from 7B to 8A. Because we're getting a little warmer over those last 20 years. That moved us from, a low temperature range of, 5 to 10 degrees up into the 10 to 15 degrees for an average low temperature. Well, 2021 with Snowmageddon proved that we will still, on average, occasionally get sub-zero temperatures here. And that will drastically affect our plant selection. That's a rare instance, though. Usually what we recommend is we go with the 7B plants, even if the USDA says we're now 8A, because if we're going to have a plant for more than about 10 years here, more than likely we're going to see a single-digit type temperature. Okay, so we're going to look for 7B. Now, if you look at the map, it's a little hard to see on this. The yellow is going to be the 8B. If you're up in, Fisher, Stonewall, Haskell, it's officially 7B, and there's even a little bit of a section down here in Taylor County that is the 7B also. But like I said, we're going to try and shoot for 7B for everywhere just because of our normal temperatures we actually really get. Next section on the location that we're talking about is the actual plot of land that you've got. Abilene over the decades has grown subdivision by subdivision. That's just how we have a tendency to get built in cities. If you're in the older portions of town, everything looks about the same as it does in the newer sections of town, just with a little bit less tree cover. Okay? If you live out towards, say, Potosi area or down towards Tuscola, a lot of times you're going to see a subdivision, and it's going to look a lot like you see in the upper left. A large plot of grass, a house, driveway, and a single tree that the contractor's gone in and planted. If you're further in town, something that's been developed for a while, you're going to have a big plot of grass, a driveway, a house, and a single tree that's a little bit bigger. Otherwise, that's about it. People just don't seem to landscape their yards very much, and I've yet to understand why. It can really make your house look really nice and pretty. So our starting point that we're going to be looking at for that plot of land, believe it or not, over about the last 50 years, the lot size has not changed very much. Anywhere in town, even in the newer subdivisions, until you start getting to the real new ones, they've started shrinking them a bit. But the lot sizes have been running about 65 feet in width and about 125 feet in length. That gives you about 8,300 square feet of couch to deal with. It's about 2/10 of an acre. You throw a house on there, a garage, driveway, a couple of sidewalks, the cable box, everything like that, and you're looking at about 5,000 square feet of landscape that you have to deal with. Easiest way that the contractors have looked at it, I'll throw some grass seed in there, sprinkle some water on it, and we've got landscaping. So if you buy a house, you'll end up with one of these. If you rent, you probably won't. You'll have to kind of work your way back through with this. But if you own a house, usually you'll get a survey of your property when you get it. Now this survey has a lot of really good information on it that'll help you out when you're doing your landscape design. It will have anything from restrictions that you have on your plot of land of what you can and can't put on your property. It will have things like easements, which is land that you technically own but don't. It's basically can be controlled by the people that own the easement. These are usually for cable, electric, telephone, gas, sewer, that sort of stuff. Will go in these easements, and if they need to come in and work on that plot of land for, to put in a new electric line or new cable line or whatever, the company is allowed to come in and do what it needs to do with little regard for what's actually sitting there on that piece of property. Okay, so if you build a nice big rose garden across your easement and they need to come in and clear, build a new cable line right through there, your rose bed's gone and they don't care, and they're not responsible to replace it. So important things to learn off of your plots. Other things that you'll see, a lot of times you'll see where your house is, any dimensions that you'll get off of that. You might get some site restrictions. And the other thing that you'll get on here that's kind of useful is what's called the compass rose, which tells you which way is north. So you now know which way the sun's going to rise, because it'll rise in the east, sets in the west, and it gives us where shadows are going to come up into play when we're talking about what will work for shade and sun-loving plants. Same plot, switched over a little bit. Some of the extra little garbage has been knocked off of this one. This particular plot is one that I used to own in San Antonio. It was kind of a fun plot. San Antonio is getting a bit shrunk in their lot size. They're down to about 55 by 100 feet now, which is really small. But this one actually had a double-sized lot because of the location. So we ended up with a really nice big backyard and still had the full-size lot up front. But, like I said, it shows a little bit of everything. You've got, the driveway, the initial sidewalk coming into the house, had a little bit of a display here for a small bed that they had to put in. But it gives us all the nice little information that we can deal with. This is that same location, except on Google Earth. When doing landscape design, Google Earth is your friend, because it can show you a lot of stuff that you may not be able to see strictly off of that survey. Okay, you can see it, when you're looking at, out and about, but it's nice to be able to see it from overhead a lot of times. Okay, so we're looking at this house right here. Okay, it's a nice single-story house. Interesting thing is, this house and this house, two-story houses. So guess what they can do whenever we have our windows open? They can look straight on in. So, nice thing about San Antonio, they've changed their restrictions. They don't allow you to mow out any trees except those that you're required to put in the house. So all of these trees are old oak trees. And so they're nice, good 6-8-inch oak trees that are about 30 feet tall. Yes, ma'am?
What does mow out mean?
Just kind of knock them all down.
Oh, okay.
So If you go down now and you go look at a plot of land that they're starting a new subdivision in, around here, most of the trees that you're going to see are mesquite. They'll come in and they'll just bulldoze everything, and you'll have a flat plot of land with no trees. So, San Antonio, Austin, and a couple of the others down in that area restrict it so that they actually have to keep all of the trees that you can. So, other things you'll notice here, here's the street that we come in on, not a major road, but we got a double lane road right up here to the on the north side of the house. Okay, this property backs right up to a moderately busy road, but it's only busy during rush hours, turns out. Didn't know that at the time, but that's what we found out. So, moving back a little bit, zooming out, we're here at the house. Really big parking lot behind us. Interesting. We happen to be right behind SeaWorld. That's the bus parking lot for SeaWorld. So there's a problem that we have. During the week, during the summer and on weekends, you'll get buses parked there and they'll sit there and idle all day long. So you'll get diesel hum coming off of it. But on the other side, we've got SeaWorld right behind us. So, it's a good thing. Well, all right. Another thing to think about, all right, at SeaWorld, this particular location just off the map to the north is Shamu Stadium. So if any of you all have gone down to SeaWorld, you got Shamu Stadium, and then right behind that you've got a big lake where they do a lot of water skiing and that sort of shows like that. It's kind of interesting to see, but they also do fireworks over top of that lake. That lake is between my house and Shamu Stadium. So during the summer, I get fireworks displays for free right off my back porch. So that's a view I want to try and keep, okay? I've got to deal with the noise, but I also want to be able to see it. So that's something I want to keep in mind. So we're going to start looking at this overall scheme. We've got 2-story houses on the side. There's something we want to block the view from because we don't want the neighbors looking in on us. But we do have a view out to the top, but we also have to worry about noise, both from road traffic and from the buses. So it's something we need to start taking into account when we start doing our landscape design. Another thing I've added in here, little black box, that's where the AC unit is. So I need to think about that for both noise, access to it, things along those lines. Move it in a little closer just to kind of see what we're looking at. Kind of breaks it down. Both lines on this, as typical in a lot of subdivisions, is a privacy fence. So it's a 6-foot privacy fence. So the lot lines are very clearly defined. This is where I can't go beyond. But part of the other thing that the original survey said, I can't put anything within 5 feet of the lot lines. Can't build a building within 5 feet of the lot lines. Okay? So if I have to build a shed or something like that, I have to make sure it's standing off of that fence line. Next thing we're going to need to worry about, we talked about how much rainfall we get. Well, that means whatever we do have for plants that we're going to be putting in, we're going to have to worry about getting them water. Okay? So first thing I did when I came up with the plan, all the hose bibs that we had on the house, I make sure I marked them so I knew where they were at. Okay? Because this is a scale drawing, I now know I've got so many feet between each of the water bibs, and I can see I need hoses that are 50 to 100 feet long, just because of noting the distances on this. Okay. The other thing I've added in here, okay, we saw those nice big beautiful oaks in the backyard. I make sure I put those in on the plot so we know where we're looking at. And that's my little pencil tree that they put in, the little 5-gallon tree. Okay. After 20 years, that tree I think is about 18 feet tall, but that's typical for oak trees. They don't grow very fast, no matter how much you water them. So, but they're nice, good, tall trees eventually. Okay. Now that we're sitting there and we've got, okay, this is the basic outline. This is where the infrastructure is for this plot. What are we actually going to use that yard for? Do we have kids? Do we have grandkids? Do they play soccer, golf, tennis? Are they swimmers? Are you going to need a pool? Okay, some of the things we're going to need to think about. What are we actually going to use this piece of property for? Do we have pets? Okay, if you have dogs, that's great. Except dogs leave landmines. Landmines and kids don't go well together. So are you going to keep your dogs in a separate run? Save one of the side yards possibly fenced off. Something to think about how you're going to handle this. Do you like to have parties? Our lot, because it was such a large lot, we had a lot of parties because a lot of the neighbors, knowing our view, would end up coming over to watch the fireworks with us. And we'd end up having barbecues about every weekend during the summer. A lot of fun, but it means I've got to think about, I've got a dog. Do I need to lock up the dog in the side yard? Do I need to make sure the dog's inside all the time? How am I going to make sure that the animals, aren't interfering with any of the social aspects I might have? Okay. Other things you might want to think about. Do you want a pool if you've got a big enough yard? Okay. Pools take up a lot of yard space. They're a lot of maintenance. You also don't want them right around trees a lot of times. So, think about where you're going to be putting things. Now, you have enough money to put a yard like this in around here and keep it watered and green? Congratulations. I'm glad you can do it. Most of us can't. Water around here gets to be a premium after a little bit. This amount of lawn is going to take you a lot of water to keep watered. You're going to have to water this about 1 inch of rainfall a week. Figure one square foot requires about 1 gallon of water per week. Okay? So if you've got a 5,000 square foot yard, to really get a good grass yard, you need to put about 5,000 gallons of water per week onto that yard. Okay, that's 20,000 gallons a month. That adds up really quick on your water bill. Okay, but there's a lot of ways we can trim that down. Believe it or not, this yard here would take up a quarter of the water needed as opposed to the grass yard. And it looks a whole lot better for most people, unless you have kids which need the grass to run around on. So, you can go the other extreme. Go with a xeriscape landscape. I would not recommend it around here. We are a little bit too wet to handle this. If you run with something like this, we have enough wind and enough moisture that all the weed seeds that blow in will germinate because of all the moisture that we have here. Okay? So this type of a landscape, you will end up with a lot of weeds in it, and it will be a maintenance nightmare because you'll be pulling weeds all the time or spraying them. Okay? They don't look bad necessarily, but it's something you need to think of when you're talking about, when you're doing your plans. The other problem that these yards have, the decomposed granite that you have will absorb sunlight during the summer very nicely, absorb all of that heat into it, and then re-radiate that heat back out into your house overnight. So your air conditioning system never really gets a break running all the time because it's always got that heat load onto it. So a yard like this around here actually creates a lot of a problem for your air conditioners to burn up quicker. Now, that standard yard that you've seen, that a standard subdivision has, big field of grass and a single tree. After about 20 years, that's what it looks like. Because nobody's done any landscaping on it. You've still got a field of grass. You've still got the one solo tree up in the front yard usually. It looks pretty boring, right? Doesn't take much to go ahead and just put in a little flower bed up front. Around the sidewalk, around the driveway if you've got the driveway to the front. A little bit of grass, keep the grass if you want, but a little bit of a flower bed just really makes your house stand out from the rest of them. Okay? One thing you will note on something like this, once you get into it, because you're watering your flower bed, and even if you're watering your grass, the grass will have a tendency to try and grow into your flower beds. If you're dealing with something like a St. Augustine lawn like this one is, not too hard to keep it under control. If you're running with a Bermuda grass lawn, which is one of the ones we recommend, it is a lot more aggressive, and you'll have a lot of more issues trying to keep the grass out of your flower beds. A lot of times what works well as an edging is actually a 6-inch deep concrete barrier on the edge, because Bermuda grass will just go through just about anything else. You can go a little bit more fancy if you want. This real nice, pretty, nice little sidewalk there of some paved stone. The one thing I will mention on something like this, that tree is not going to be a healthy tree if this is done improperly. Trees do not like the level of the yard moved. Once that tree is down and in place, that's where it likes to live at. You can raise the level of the yard, but you have to do it very slowly, on the order of like 2, maybe 3 inches a year in height at most. Trees, if you bury the roots of the tree too deep all of a sudden, it will suffocate the tree out and it will die. It'll kill the tree. So you have to be very careful of that. The other problem with this is this concrete retaining wall that they've put in. If they've raised that ground level up beyond what's called the root flare, as your tree comes down right towards the base of the tree, you'll notice it starts flaring out and starts going into the root section. That root flare, anything above that is very susceptible to rot if it's got too much moisture on it. Anything below grade is naturally designed to survive being in semi-wet conditions, but that the bark and stuff like that will rot right off of the tree trunk and kill the tree. So you don't want to have any dirt above that root flare if at all possible. So on something like this, yeah, you could put that retaining wall in, build a little raised bed right around it, won't be a problem. But you'd almost have to double rig this with an interior ring wall also to keep the dirt off of that tree. Of course, that means you've got a pit there where all the leaves and everything kind of blow into, so you'll have to keep that cleaned out. So something like this, it looks nice, but it's a bit of a hassle for the tree. So think about that before you do it. You want to go a little bit more fancy? Maybe take over a large section of your backyard, make it a little quiet oasis for you. Well, I can't say for sure. It does kind of look like that there's a small pond in here, kind of surrounded by a bunch of plants so that the winds don't evaporate a lot of the moisture off of that water. So we get a little bit less evaporation and it don't have to keep it full quite as much. Also, you can just kind of hide in there away from everything else and just kind of, absorb yourself back into nature, which is not a bad thing. But it's kind of a neat little thing. You just kind of wall it off. Like I said, it's going to be grass, so you're going to have a little bit of an issue with that boundary between the lawn and the area. Yes, ma'am?
And what is the ground cover? Is it mulch?
This is going to be mulch, yeah. Which I'll talk about here shortly. Okay, so we're back to this. So we're looking at what we want to do here. Let's see, what do I have? Okay, so we went through, got our infrastructure down. We now know what we're actually going to be using the plot of land for. Next thing we want to do is when we start designing the actual landscape, okay? So when we're looking at it, the human eye is designed to see symmetry. It naturally picks up symmetrical things as pretty things. It looks very aesthetically pleasing for us. So we want to try and keep symmetry if at all possible. The problem that we run into is that usually when we build a house, we have a driveway a lot of times on one side, which means we can only do a tree, we can only do something to counter it on the other side. So it's a little bit hard to keep that balance, but you can work with it, keep a couple of, say, small bushes on one side and a large tree and maybe a large bush on the other side to go with that driveway, just to try and see if you can keep things as symmetrical as possible. The more you can, the better it will look to the eye as you drive by. Keeping it simple. The more complicated it is, the harder the maintenance problems you're going to run into, the harder it is to put it in, and probably the more expensive it's going to be also. Okay? Simple is always nice. Okay, when we're starting to actually think about putting in what we're going to, our plan into action, first thing we're going to want to look at is what's called hardscapes. These can be anything from driveways, sidewalks, patios, pools, anything where concrete or heavy-duty infrastructure or heavy-duty equipment may be needed to put in the infrastructure first. We want to try and get those in first, okay? Don't want to put a rose bed in and then go, oh, I want to put a pool right next to it where the excavator is just going to take out your rose bed, okay? So think ahead of time. Even if you just have the plot ahead of time, go, yeah, I want to do this. It may be 5 years down the road, but plan on, okay, I've got it planned, so I don't want to put anything right here so that because I know I'm going to be doing this later, okay? We want to keep the hardscapes down to about no more than 30% of our landscape for two main reasons. One is that heat effect that I was mentioning earlier. Also is for water runoff. The hardscapes do not allow any water to absorb into the land underneath of them. And so anything that lands on that, for the most part, ends up going into the stormwater drains and can cause flooding issues downhill. Okay? So if we can keep the water on our property, it solves issues with, flooding out the neighbors or some of the neighbors further downstream. Also, when we're talking about this sort of a thing, if we've got that much water coming off of our property, any fertilizers or pesticides that we may have put on our lawns will end up in our water system, which will end up, once it hits the stormwater drains, it ends up in our water system somewhere down the line. Like I said, make sure you get these on first. Okay, lawns. As master gardeners, we recommend we can do lawns. They're nice, they're healthy. I personally prefer to do zero lawn if at all possible. I try and do flower beds as much as possible. A lot less maintenance headaches, and it's a lot less water for me. But that's my personal preference. A lot of people do like lawns. If you're going to do a lawn, do it right at least. We recommend 3 main types of lawns. We're going to try for Bermuda grass. Bermuda grass is probably one of the best lawns for around here. It's a thin-bladed grass. It is extremely heat and drought tolerant. The only big problem with it that it has is that it's extremely heat and drought tolerant. So on those good wet years, it grows and it grows and it grows. There was a couple of years ago, I mowed the yard twice a week because it was just raining so much that I couldn't keep the grass under control. So it's nice to have. It requires very little actual moisture from us to actually let it to grow. And then the other big problem with Bermuda grass is that it goes dormant over the winter. First frost that we have basically kills off the top half of the grass. The risers, the rhizomes, and the base portions of the grass itself do not die off, but the top leaves do, and you'll get that yellowed lawn look. Not real pretty for the winter, but it's nice because once it does do that, you can mow it right then, and you don't have to mow your yard again for the rest of the year until spring starts again. Come late April, early May, it'll start greening up again, and you can start dealing with it that way. When you're talking about water, we're talking usually it loves about 1 inch of rainfall a week. It can handle about a ½ inch of rainfall a week and still consider itself good. So if you want to water, say, every other week at an inch, give it an inch of rainfall, and then go about 2 weeks, it will look okay. It won't look great, but it'll still look pretty decent. Okay, so it's one of the ways you can help cut down on how much water you're actually putting out. Now, when we're talking wintertime, you still actually do need to have some moisture on your grass over the winter. You don't want to let it dry out completely, otherwise it will die out. This year we've had plenty of moisture over the winter. It doesn't take but maybe ½ 3/4 of an inch of moisture about once a month to keep that grass alive. It doesn't need much to grow, it just needs just enough to sustain itself in its dormant state. If you're looking for a wide-bladed grass, we're going to be looking at probably St. Augustine. Works pretty decently. It does take a little bit of shade as opposed to the Bermuda. Bermuda cannot handle shade at all. St. Augustine will handle some shade. It still needs 4 to 6 hours of direct sunlight a day. So think about that. It won't work well, especially if you're under a heavy canopy for a tree. Okay. Everybody asks me, well, what grass grows well under trees? None. Plain and simple. If it's got that much shade, nothing's going to grow well in there. Some plants will, things like hostas and that sort of stuff might be able to grow under a full dense shade canopy. For the most part, if you've got a heavy dense shade tree, best bet is to just put some mulch around it, maybe a little border around it, call it good. Don't worry about trying to grow anything under there. Okay. The one problem with St. Augustine grass, it does get fungal issues if it gets too wet for too long of a problem. Both molds, mildews, and then there's a couple of bacterial diseases that can really affect St. Augustine. So just keep an eye out for those. It does need a little bit more water. We're talking probably a solid inch a week is usually what it's going to look like to really be healthy. A little bit more is not a bad thing. If you're really trying to just stress it out and just do bare minimum, you're still going to need 3/4 of an inch of rainfall a week. So, the other type of grass that we can recommend is zoysias. That you can get these both in thin and thick bladed varieties. Zoysias I would recommend highly. I used mine in my house down in San Antonio. It's expensive. That's the one problem, because you do have to put it in as a sod or plugs. I would not recommend the plugs. I would recommend full sod. The plugs, you end up with a very patchy looking yard. And it takes a while for it to grow out, like 3 years. So you're going to end up with a lot of weeds in between those time periods. To give you an idea how expensive the zoysia can get, when I put the zoysia in San Antonio at the time, this is almost 15 years ago, Bermuda and St. Augustine were running at about $70 a pallet. The zoysia ran $150. So it's expensive, but it was worth every penny I paid. I can guarantee you that. The zoysia filled in so thickly, I did not have weeds at all. I never had to spray for weeds. I would occasionally get a weed that would pop up, a weed, like one out here, and I could walk over and pull it out, and that was it. It completely choked everything out. It grew at a reasonably slow rate because even in San Antonio, we didn't get a huge amount of rain, but we still got enough rain that just the natural rainfall would keep it green and healthy. It's kind of like the one particular variety I had was kind of like a Bermuda, thin-bladed, kind of went dormant in the winter if it froze. But it was just like walking out on a shag carpet in your bare feet. It was beautiful. So, yes, ma'am.
How much do you need to water that?
An inch a week is going to be good. I could probably go by usually with about a half inch of rainfall, usually equivalent. So, every other week I'd water it about an inch. So. Yes, ma'am.
Is there seeds? Is it?
No, it is only through sod. That's the only problem. Yes, ma'am.
I have one section of my yard that just stays dry all the time.
Mhm.
Is there
You-
alternative to put in between this big dry patch?
Yeah, you could.
Basically, it gets full sun all day.
Yeah, if you've got a full sun, real dry spot in your yard, you could probably put some zoysia in there. It will fill itself in, and it will slowly expand out over the years. It's not a fast-growing grass. That's the one reason I say don't get the plugs. It takes a while for it to fill in if you're doing the plugs. But if you do it as a sod, it looks really nice. So, let's see, was there? Okay, trees. Okay, trees are some of the most useful pieces of landscaping you can have in your yard. Can add value to your house, add shade, so you don't have to, if the tree is placed right, you don't have to air condition your house quite as much because you can shade it off. So it's very useful. What we're looking for, though, when we're looking at trees, we want to look at something that's either a native tree for our area or something that's adapted to our area. Now, adapted trees are basically a tree that grows in a climate very similar to us. Same moisture requirements, same soil requirements that we have here. And so we're looking at a tree that's used to not having a whole lot of moisture having the moisture when it does come in intermittent patches that could be heavy rainfall, and also something that can handle a moderately high alkaline soil. For the most part, the soil around here is sitting at about a pH of 8, which is pretty high for most people. So, if the tree can handle that, it'll probably do reasonably well. I've got a list here in the next couple of slides that'll show you a lot of the different varieties. Other thing to think about, are you trying to put this tree in for shade, or are you going to do it for food production? Okay, things like pecan trees, orchards for like apples, pears, peaches, whatnot. You can do a lot of good growth for, food production around here. Just understand, when you do that, research what type of variety will actually work in our area. If we're looking for food production out of our trees, understand most trees require a certain number of cold hours, or what they call chill hours, per year, which is the number of hours per year that is below 40 degrees. We sit right at about 800 chill hours a year. So if you're looking for a apple variety, you need to look for one that needs about 800 chill hours a year. Okay? Understand that can vary drastically. If we have a very cold winter up front and then get a warm spell early in the spring, those trees will start budding out, and we might end up with a late freeze, which will kill off the crop. Okay, so it's real hard sometimes to get fruit crops around here because of that. So look at the full size of the tree when you're buying it. Yes, it may take it 20 or 25 years for that tree to get up to full size, but understand it will eventually get up to that size as long as it has enough moisture. Okay. Look at the different shapes that you want for your tree. We were talking about symmetry earlier. We can, when we're looking at that symmetrical thing, we can do some differences in shape to kind of balance out maybe something that's different over on one side of the house to the other. Okay. We can look for things like a pine tree, which will be more of a conical type shape, or we could look for something like a Chinese pistache, which is like a big ball standing on a stick when it comes full grown. So we can kind of get an interesting variety of what we're looking for. Some trees are deciduous, which means they drop their leaves every year, so that in wintertime you end up with a maintenance issue of having to deal with the leaves. Or you can have an evergreen tree, which will keep the needles usually because they're more of a pine tree or that type of a tree, will be able to keep itself green all winter, so you don't have that maintenance issue. Now, one thing about leaves, please don't rake your leaves up, throw them in a bag, and throw them at the curb to haul off to the dump. Okay? Just mow over the leaves and let the leaves mulch themselves into the ground naturally. That's the best place for them. You can pull them out of your flower beds if you want, throw them into your grass area, and just run them over with the lawnmower. Best thing for your grass, because it adds a long-term nitrogen source for that grass to grow. Okay? When we're talking about size of trees, this is one of the key things. Do not plant your trees near power lines. Remember that easement I was talking about for power companies? Power companies are required by law to keep their power lines clear of tree branches. Okay? That is their requirement. They don't care about that tree. It's in their easement. They will clear the tree out however they see fit. Okay? So, yeah, that's a pretty bad location for a tree. You don't want to plant it right under the power lines. The one on the right, you can see, looks like they've come by and just cleaned one side of the tree completely off. Okay? Well, that now has overbalanced the tree because all of the weight is on one side. Well, power lines are usually in the front of the house. And so all of that weight on that tree is probably towards the house. So that's a tree waiting to fall on somebody's house. Power company's not liable if it does fall on your house after they've trimmed it. Yeah. Like I said, power companies don't care. Their job is to keep it clean. So think about where you're planting a tree when it comes in relationship to your electrical power. Okay, here are the trees. These small trees that we've got listed, they should be in your pamphlet. You should be able to I'm hoping you can see them. Depends on how small Heather printed it. So when we're talking small trees, we're talking less than 20 feet tall at height, full grown height. A lot of these can grow reasonably quickly, which isn't a problem for this small of a tree because it's not going to fall over, have too much issues with wind. One thing to think about though, where is it here? Crepe myrtle. Crepe myrtle is a tree. Do not top your crepe myrtle, okay? We call it crepe murder. Some idiot back in the 80s started this trend of taking crepe myrtles and cutting them back harshly, and it has spread that everybody thinks that's what you need to do. Do not cut your crepe myrtles back like that. They are a tree. Just let them grow up naturally. If you don't like where it's at, move it or take it out completely and replace it with something a little bit different, but try and just let them grow. Most crepe myrtles come out usually as either a single or a couple of stalk trees that look almost like an overgrown bush, but they're still actually trees. So you can do some serious damage to that crepe myrtle long term if you keep cutting it back. Okay, let's see some of the other ones that are kind of interesting. So, like I said, it's kind of a nice little list of good trees to use. Okay, these are some of the larger trees. These will be 20 feet and above. Understand that if you get a fast-growing tree in this area, be very careful of where you plant that. Fast-growing trees are not nearly as strong as you're going to find for the slower-growing trees. You can count on a tree. A good moderate growth rate tree is going to be about a foot per year.
I'm sorry, so this list of trees that you have are good for this area?
These will be good for this area, yes.
All of these that you're...
Yes.
Because I haven't ever seen a ginkgo around
Yeah,
here.
I mean, some of them will work here. It's a little bit, they'll be a little bit harder to grow. Some of them will be a little harder to grow, like the ginkgo, but, they will grow here. So. Okay. Other things we want to look at, shrubs and flowers, all right? Like I said, we're usually trying to go with the perennials. That way we don't have to keep planting them every year. Although, a bed of annuals is not a bad thing because you can kind of change that not only annually, but also a couple of times during the year a lot of times. Plant pansies in early spring, then switch over to petunias, and then maybe some other stuff later on down the year. So it gets you a couple of different colors. But for the most part, we're talking about perennials. So we're also looking native and adaptive. Okay, so these are plants that will be able to handle our weather a lot of times. One of the nice things when we're talking about smaller things like shrubs and flowers, not only can we select for height, width, color, but also texture. You can get something like an ornamental grass, which could be a very feathery look, or you can go with something like a prickly pear cactus, so you've got that big thick pad with the thorns, or anything in between. So it's kind of, you've got a lot of range to play with when you're starting to work on your layout for your garden, what exactly you want to do. And it's kind of neat to be able to pull in a couple of different textures of different plants so that you can get a wide range, and it makes it a much more interesting garden to look at. Also, think about the full size of your plant. My current garden that I've got here, I had a lantana I planted it, researched it very thoroughly. It said it grows 3 to 4 feet in diameter and about 3 feet tall. So I planted it. I said, okay, I'm going to go back 2 feet from the driveway so that when it grew out the 2 feet in one direction, it would not be in any problems with the driveway. That little bugger decided to grow 6 feet last year. It's sitting about 3 feet over top of the driveway now. It is ridiculous. And it's about yay tall. So, you shoot for what you can, but sometimes even the information will not be quite right. So, but do keep an eye on that. Yes, ma'am.
I have a ton of lantana too.
Mm-hmm.
And it went over my driveway. Mine kind of spread more than
Yeah.
the combination of the spreading and the upright one.
Yeah.
But I was afraid to trim it, so if I trim it, will it make it grow the other direction?
Okay, lantana that's kind of sitting out over top of an area. You can go ahead and trim it as you need it. It's not going to hurt it too much.
Because
It won't really make it grow the other direction, but it'll just kind of, you'll have to kind of keep that up, keeping it trimmed back on that one side, unfortunately. So the other option is possibly taking it and, digging it up and moving it back a couple of feet if you can. So fully established plants you can transplant. They don't like it a lot, but as long as you get a big enough root ball to move at the time, it should not be too much of a problem. When we're talking shrubs and plants, a lot of times, we talked about symmetry earlier. One of the odd things when we're talking about numbers of plants a lot of times, though, it seems like odd numbers work better. Don't ask me why. It doesn't work with symmetry, but when you're talking about planting in a group of plants, if you plant 3 at a time, it looks better to the eye than it does 4. Okay? And you still want to try and keep it symmetrically looking, but it's, you will have to do it with an odd number of plants. It's kind of weird. If you do a single plant, it's kind of more, you want to do that as a standout plant, unless you're a master gardener who wants one of everything. Okay? But that doesn't really look good. That's the thing. You want to try and keep a couple of each plant, not just a solo. When you're doing smaller plants, especially little short type plants, you're going to want to try and do more of a mass planting of those instead of just a couple. You want to try and do a fairly large section. It makes that plant stand out a lot more. So, this is my current garden. This is the one I started in 2020 once we moved down here. We had grass in here, and I was getting tired of mowing it because it was not a particularly nice looking. It was a Bermuda, but it really wasn't a good thick Bermuda, and it just didn't seem to, it wanted to grow straight up. It didn't want to spread. So I'm like, okay, let me put a flower bed in here. That's the way I don't have to worry about watering it. And so I went through and I spent 2020 about every other week. I was hosing this whole entire area down with Roundup to kill it. That's the one problem with Bermuda grass. That's about the only way you're going to get Bermuda grass to stop growing, is to just absolutely douse it in Roundup. Okay? So, got it down. It was bare dirt. I then went in, threw a little bit of compost into it, tilled that into the top couple inches of soil, and started planting it out. Here's the lantana that overgrew everything that it was supposed to. So, the key thing that I did when I was planning this is, okay, not only did I put in a scale drawing, this is how big everything is supposed to be, but everything that I put in there, I put in not only as the correct size for scale, but also the correct color. Just so that I could sit there and go, yeah, this is going to be a red area, this will be blue over here, I've got some yellow over here, so that I could really get an idea of what the garden was going to look like long term. Okay? Put in the patio area, which we put in. It was very nice. Now, when we were talking about watering earlier. Okay, let's see. I'll do that. Now I'll get back. I'll come back to this in a minute when we're doing watering. So this is kind of the way you want to look at it, though. You want to look at your overall plan. Say, this is what I want to do. Now we'll go in and do it just a little at a time. A lot of times. Yes, ma'am. This particular one is a 3D modeling software that you can get free online called Tinkercad. Tinkercad. Yeah, there are several of them online where you can go find any 3D modeling software. The reason I did it in 3D, I actually did the house and everything. I'm an engineer, so I'm anal with that. I like doing it. You can do it on pen and paper. And there are several, I'm sure there's other programs that you can get that would do very nicely for 2D stuff. Yeah, a lot of it. Yeah. So, okay. So, like I said, preparing flower beds, I said, remove the grass. Bermuda's going to be murder to try and remove. St. Augustine really isn't too bad. Most of the native grasses really aren't too bad either to get them out. A lot of times you're going to have to dig them out, though. Yes, sir?
You mentioned something about killing the only way to kill Bermuda was which way?
Roundup, usually, chemically. Okay. Now, the one thing you want to think about if you're going to chemically kill Bermuda with like a Roundup or a similar product, Do not get the extended control versions, that say, kills for a year, because anything you go try and plant it for the next year will die out. So just use the regular stuff that's just designed to do contact kill.
So how much should you wait to plant after you spray? Kill whatever you want.
Roundup is a contact killer. So if you spray it and it gets on the plant, it then affects the plant. So I can go through, the next day or the day after and, move that grass out of the way and start planting. Won't be a problem. It doesn't stay in the soil. Yes, sir.
It won't all the time get all the way into the roots.
Yeah.
I think it's better if you maybe leave it a week.
Yeah.
Depends on the season.
Yeah, and that's the one thing especially with like Bermuda grass, because it is so tough and hardy. Usually when I talk about killing Bermuda grass, I'll tell you to go ahead and spray it, get it all, water it, get it all nice in a good growth time frame. Let it be growing, spray it down. Come back about a week later, tell the grass you're sorry. Here, have a little bit of water. See if come on, try and grow again, and then hit it again with the Roundup. It usually takes at least 2 doses of Roundup to kill off Bermuda. So,
One more question.
yes, ma'am.
Because I'm looking to do something like that.
Yeah.
But I was thinking of just putting like cardboard, newspaper, that won't kill it, and then.
Nope. Bermuda will grow through concrete. Okay? You will not be able to stop it. And to give you an idea, I have raised beds back in Midland that were, 2.5 feet tall. I had a Bermuda plant that grew up through that 2.5 feet of dirt, and I was never able to get the Bermuda grass out of that raised bed. I'd dig it all the way to the ground, and I couldn't get it all out. Okay. Most of your gardens around here are going to need compost because the soils are not real good. We do have soil testing samples in the back with paperwork. Best thing you can do is to get your soil tested to find out what you have to start with. This way you know if you need to add any particular nutrients into your soil. Is there too much organic material, not enough organic material, what type of soil you actually have. Most people to the north side of town will end up having sand in this area, or at least a semi-sandy soil. If you go down more towards the south, like towards where I live, it's almost 100% clay. So it's kind of a neat thing to know, okay, this is what the yard is, this is the soil, all the interesting information you can find from a soil test kit, you can get from that. A&M does it. The cheapest route's about $8 for your soil kit. It's not too bad, and it gives you a lot of really good information.
One thing that you see also, if you're in a developed area, don't go off what the neighbors were or what your friends are down the street.
Yeah.
Because they move and fill dirt.
Yeah. He's mentioning that a lot of times if your neighbor gets a soil sample, your soil probably won't be the same as theirs if you've gone into a new subdivision. A lot of times because the soil here is not real good, they'll truck in various loads of dirt to help fill in everything. And you never know, your soil could be drastically different than your neighbor's. So it's always best to get your own soil tested.
What do we want our soil to be?
What do we want our soil to be? Perfect soil is going to be a sandy loam sitting at about 7 pH. You're not going to get it. So one of the key things, adding compost will do a lot of good work on your soil. It will bring your pH closer to 7. Doesn't matter if you're acidic or alkaline. Normally we're alkaline around here at about an 8. You can bring that a lot closer to 7 with a lot of compost. It also brings up the organic material in your soil, which will help break up the soil so it can absorb a lot of the moisture that we do get when it does rain. So it adds a little bit of nutrients, both nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium into the soil. So it's the perfect solution for most of our soil problems we have here. Next thing is to mulch. When we get the flower bed in, we want to mulch it down. Mother Nature does not like to have bare soil. It will find some way to cover it up. Whether it be weeds, Bermuda grass, or mulch. Okay, mulch is the nice one because you can kind of keep it under control. Now, the nice thing about mulch, if you do a good layer of mulch, now I'm not talking the layer of mulch that your contractor put in your flower gardens when they built the house, which is about that much. That's not a layer of mulch. We're talking 3 to 4 inches of mulch. Okay, that's a lot of mulch, but it works very well. It does a lot of good things for the soil. Helps retain the soil moisture. All the dry winds that we have will suck the soil moisture right off of the surface of the land if we don't cover it. Okay, that mulch keeps a good break between it. It will keep the soil cooler in summer, warmer in winter, because it's got a nice big thermal blanket right there. So, weeds have a very hard time growing through a 4-inch layer of mulch. Okay, they can grow through an inch of mulch without too much problem, but you get 3 or 4 inches of mulch, they have a very hard time growing through that. So there's one of your big maintenance problems of weeding isn't a problem anymore. Okay, any weeds you do get a lot of times will just be weed seeds that have deposited on the surface, and you can just kind of knock those off and take care of those very quickly and easily. Yes, ma'am.
Does that include that new kind of rubber mulch?
I would not recommend a non-organic mulch. You can put in the non-organic mulches, decomposed granite, the rubber mulches. That's fine for looks, but a lot of the benefits that you're going to get with a mulch product, mulch over time will break down also and help improve the soil. So the moisture content, well, let's see. Some of the heat retention is not quite as good with like the rubberized mulches, and then you've got the soil improvement that you'll get with an organic mulch is better. So.
Two more questions on the mulch part.
Yes, ma'am.
What kind do you recommend? And should we, when you put it in and it gets ugly looking, do we just leave it there or do we just put more on top of that?
Okay. What type of mulch do we recommend? Organic mulch, usually in the form of pine chips, pine shavings, chipped, shredded mulch, whatever you like. I personally I like the big nuggets. The one problem with the big nuggets around here, big nugget pine bark mulch floats. So if you have a slope or an area that gets a lot of water into it, that mulch has a tendency to kind of drift a little bit. I have a tendency to also put borders around my garden, so even if it does float, it has a barrier and it kind of settles right there. So, but that's just a personal preference. So if it's a bark mulch, it does really well. Pine needles work really well. You can do things like straw if you want, but those don't look quite as good. After a year or two, a lot of times your mulch will start breaking down, start not looking quite as good, and so you can just add another layer right on top. It will slowly build the soil level up as it decomposes, but that's not a big problem. It takes a long time for it to build up pretty heavily. Okay, when we're talking about watering our plant beds, we want to make sure we're watering the plants first. Okay, no matter how much you try and water concrete, it won't grow. Okay, so if you've got a sprinkler system or you're running a manual watering system, don't water your driveways, sidewalks, streets. Don't water to the point where the water is running off into the streets. Just make sure the water is going where you actually need it. Okay. If you've got plants with wide variety of watering needs, say a rose which needs 1.5 inches of moisture a week, as opposed to a prickly pear which needs 1 inch of moisture a month, don't put those right next to each other. Okay, or at least make sure that they're getting watered completely differently. Otherwise, you'll overwater the cactus and kill it, or you'll underwater the rose and it won't look good. So try and group things together when you're watering by how much water they're going to need. We're looking on average about 1 inch per week. Okay, for most of the plants that we're looking around here. Now this is during the growing season. Okay, so we're looking from April through November. Okay, November, December, January, and February, and March, we don't really have to water as much. We can cut back to a quarter of the watering that we need. A lot of times this will be taken care of naturally though, so we don't have to worry about it. When I do talk about moisture, I am talking about moisture that the plant needs. Now, if it's getting it naturally with a rainfall, that's great. If otherwise, we're going to have to supply it. So, let's see. Yeah. Okay. Like I said, make sure you're watering your plants. If you have a sprinkler system that you're going to be using, know how to use it. Learn how to use that little box. Unfortunately, it's like the VCR for most people. They've never learned how to program the clock on it. Most people have never actually figured out how to use their sprinkler control system. Most of them are not very hard, but just learn how to use it and make sure it's watering properly. Okay. We do have a video on our YouTube page talking about irrigation, which I go through about an hour lecture on talking all sorts of different things on watering. And a lot of the information you'll need can be found in that video. Test your sprinkler systems, usually once a month at a minimum. Once a week would be better if possible, or at least if your sprinkler system's set to run today, kind of go out and make sure, kind of take a glance at it. Make sure there's, if you've got it set early morning where you're not up, when you go out in the morning, make sure there's no big puddles floating around your yard. So to see if you've had any sprinkler heads or big leaks. So just kind of keep an eye on things. Make sure you aren't overwatering things. Okay. Now, when I was talking about watering our gardens also, and I was telling you we could cut back a lot on how much we water plants versus grass. Okay. This area here is about 600 square feet. Okay. At about 1 gallon per square foot for 1 inch of rainfall. Okay. That grass area needed about 600 gallons per week to keep it green and nice and healthy. Now then, I'm using drip irrigation. Drip irrigation is much more efficient, okay, than a sprinkler system. So if I was using an overhead sprinkler system with this, I'd probably be running about 50 to 60% efficiency just because of the way they work. So to get that 600 gallons of water, I'd probably need to put 1,000 gallons of water through the sprinkler system to keep that grass healthy. If I do it as a drip irrigation system, efficiency is about 98%, so I don't have to worry about any losses. And here's the nice thing. All the brown is mulch, okay? So I don't care about watering mulch. I don't want to water the mulch. If I water something around here, stuff will grow in the form of weeds or anything else. So all I want to water is just what I want to grow. So my lantana, I've got one single line of drip irrigation, runs right through here. It puts a drip emitter every foot, gives me a 1 foot pattern of moisture when I run it, gives me 1 inch of rainfall for an hour of use, okay? So 30 feet long, I use 30 gallons to water all of my lantana. And they grow beautifully, like I was talking about. I've got a set of plants up along the front of the house that you can't quite see in this picture. One more row, 30 feet, 30 more gallons of water. Each of the rose bushes, I will do a ring around each rose bush. 6 foot section of hose gives me about a 2 foot circle of water, okay? Now, that 2 foot circle of irrigation goes 6 inches on either side, gives me a nice ring of water. After these rose bushes are fully grown, they'll have roots out in that moisture zone, okay? So the first 6 months that they're there, I might have to water a little extra on the roses. But once they're established, I just have to water on those rings. Well, I've got 10 roses. That 6 foot ring only has 6 drip emitters to get that beautiful ring of moisture, okay? 60 gallons of water, okay? 1,000 gallons a week to keep this green for grass, 120 gallons to keep it green with beautiful plants. That is how you can really save on your water bill. Okay? Drip irrigation and nice pretty flowers that are designed to work in this area. Okay? Okay, we've got a couple of things here. Our main website that we have has a lot of information, both on upcoming events and some information on different topics. We are on Facebook. We do post a lot of things, both articles and things like that, also upcoming events. We do have a YouTube channel now. Please like, subscribe, click the bell notification button, and all that other stuff that all the YouTubers always say. But we do have most of these programs up on the YouTube channel, so if you did miss something, you can go back and review. Okay? This web address that is on your page is actually wrong. This is the correct one. Unfortunately, I made a typo when I had those printed out, and I caught it later. So it is West Texas Gardening, not Gardeners. All right, if that's it, thank you all for coming. If you have any questions, I'll be around for a little bit. Thank you.